All right, guys, welcome back to the show. So I am going to talk about this Gina Carano thing. Carano, is that how you say her name? I was a big fan of The Mandalorian, and today, she ended up getting fired because she made a post on the internet. Before I get into that story, though, I want to show you something I received when I logged into my Instagram account today. This is what I got. Your post goes against our community guidelines, and we removed your post because it goes against our community guidelines. We created these guidelines to support and protect our community on Instagram. Post removed, and they show me this little icon of the post that I posted back in March 29th, day after my birthday. I posted this March 29th, 2020, and nearly a year later, they decide to remove the post, and I ended up getting this notification on Instagram today. So I wanted to show you guys that. I also received on my Facebook page, a notification on my Facebook fan page saying that I'm limited. My actions now on my fan page are limited. There's only certain things I can and cannot do because I've gone against their community guidelines in some way. So we're seeing this sort of censorship slaughterhouse continue. You're not allowed to hear certain information because you cannot be trusted with that information. I don't know if you realize this, but you're not an adult. And even if you are an adult, you're stupid. And you cannot discern between good information and bad information. And so I need to discern it for you. And then after I discern it, and I decide what is safe for your ears and eyes, then I'll let you see it. But I'm not going to let you see something that might be very popular because I fear you're going to believe in it. Even though millions of other people have believed in it, I'm not going to let you. And that's what we're doing here because we have to be safe. I actually want to show you this. Now, this is something, before we go into this, what is censorship? The Gina Carano story. Also, Robert Kennedy Jr., and it was also censored. Also, Project Veritas was censored today. My post was removed. It's a form of censorship. Now, people always say, and this is always the argument we always get, which is it's not censorship. It's not the government doing it to you. That this is a private company and they could do whatever they want. Stop your complaining. It's not censorship. So I want to take a moment and I want us to go over the definition of censorship because it's not about the government. Censorship is, let's just look at this right here. I Googled for you, censorship, because I know it's difficult to do. It says right here, the suppression or prohibition of any parts of books, films, news, etc. that are considered obscene, politically unacceptable, or a threat to security. Okay, there's one definition. Let's go ahead and look at the ACLU's definition of censorship. It says right here, ACLU, censorship, the suppression of words, images, or ideas that are offensive, happens whenever some people succeed in imposing their personal, political, or moral values on others. So it doesn't have to do with the government. The government censoring is against the First Amendment. That is legally and it's unconstitutional for the government to do it. But censorship, it happens in many forms. And it's sometimes people say censorship is good. Censorship is not really a black and white issue. Sometimes people think censorship is good. You might maybe want to censor certain, like pornography from mainstream websites where children visit, right? That's a form of censorship. But I think that's a form of censorship that many of us agree with. Many of us agree that if something's illegal, then it should be censored, right? So we don't want people to be able to just openly sell certain drugs on the internet, right, to our children when it's an illegal activity. We want that to be cracked down on because that's illegal, right? So that's a form of censorship, but that is following legal guidelines. So we say you're not allowed to show certain types of pornography ever because it's illegal, right? It's an illegal form of it. So there are certain times when we say censorship is good, and it usually has to do with, is the activity legal? And if it's not, then it should always be censored, at least from the eyes of anybody who, like drugs, like I mentioned, right? And we all know that there's sometimes that you cannot say certain things that if you do incite violence, or if you're inciting, if you yell fire in a crowded theater, that you're going to be punished for that. because it's not protected speech in that way. So we do know that there are some times when censorship is okay. And these private companies or your neighborhood or maybe your private school that you send your kid to, these different groups engaging in censorship is not an infringement on the First Amendment. Maybe there is I could make an argument. I hope somebody is making this argument in courts that actually the big tech censorship that's going on is actually a direct infringement on the First Amendment, because I believe big tech is censoring because they're being pressured by the government. So that government intervention is actually a direct infringement on the First Amendment. I don't believe it's in these big tech companies. I don't think it's in the best interest of their business, in the best interest of their bottom line, in the best interest of their revenue to censor people and kick them off their platform. I think for them, the more the merrier. And you're not going to suddenly ban these platforms simply because they have some people on there that you don't like. You're still going to engage and use those platforms. So I actually don't think it has anything to do with their business model, kicking people off or silencing people or censoring people. In fact, the argument could be made that it hurts them financially. So then we have to ask the question, why are they doing it? Well, if the government is pressuring them to do it, that is a case to be made that this is actually a First Amendment issue. However, if it's your private studio that you go to, maybe you go to art class in the private studio, and they say, listen, we don't do political talk when we're in this room. There's some bars that say that. They say no political talk in the bar, right? Okay, fair enough. It's a private business. They're allowed to implement that form of censorship. But there are times that we as a society should stop and say, okay, I understand this is not an illegal thing for you to do, to censor. I understand that it's within your right, I guess, to call for a certain book from the private school to be banned. My favorite book of all time, To Kill a Mockingbird, has been banned in many private schools. And so, okay, is it in your right to do this? I suppose it's not an infringement on the First Amendment, but it's not exactly the kind of society I want to live in, and not really conducive to creating a free thinking society. It's not inducive to developing the type of America we believe we live in, one that values freedoms. And so even though it might not be against the First Amendment, even though it might not be against the law to do, we should as a society take a step back and say, yeah, but that's not the kind of society we want to live in. Just like we have decided over the years, over the few decades, we've decided as a society, we don't want to live in a society that shames, let's say, women for not being stay-at-home moms, right? There was a time when women were entering the workforce, a lot of people would thumb their noses at them and say, oh, wow, you're making a terrible decision for your children. And they would actually speak up to these women and shame them, or maybe the sexual exploits of women, and shame them and call them slutty or whatever they want to call them, right? So we have evolved in many ways as a society, and we've said we don't want to live in a society. It's not a legal issue. You can legally call women all these names all you want, right? You can legally walk up to any woman and say, you should be staying at home with your children. You're not doing your children a good service by working. You can legally do that. Do we want to live in a society that does, is a question. Do we want to live in a society that, so we as a society have to make these issues, and they're not involving our government. So I just wanted to share with you, first of all, what the definition of censorship is, because there seems to be this, and it's kind of ironic because whenever I log into Facebook or something, I see people discussing censorship. So many people say, well, this isn't the government. So go do your research, and find out what censorship is. You guys don't know anything about it. This is not the government. This is a private institution. Therefore, it's not censorship. Well, no, maybe you need to do your research. Censorship goes beyond the First Amendment and the government. Censorship is something that is done regularly. You can self-censor. That has nothing to do with the government or laws or even a private entity. Censorship is censorship. And we need, as a society, to make decisions on what do we want what kind of society do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a society that shames gay people for holding hands walking down the street? Is it illegal to shame them? No, it is not illegal to shame them. You can actually walk up to them and say whatever you think is on your mind about it, right? But do we want to live in that kind of society? We have to make these decisions as a society, and they're cultural, and we have to decide what kind of a culture do we want our America to be. So right now we're living in a culture where there's a lot of censorship. It is ramped up. It has gotten worse over these last 4 years, and it's the Democrats in particular and people who love the Democratic Party, Democrat voters. This doesn't happen on the actually, this doesn't really happen at the governmental level as much. I mean, the government is pressuring these big tech companies, like I mentioned, but a lot of this censorship is happening just the online mobs. The online mobs are going after others and saying, fire this person or ban them or boycott them. We don't want them around because they've said this thing that I don't agree with, right? So I'm not going to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. being suspended. I'm going to save that to the end of the night when I shut off YouTube, and you guys can follow me over to Vimeo or to Rockfin, which you can go there now and watch the show. The show's on live there now, so you can make that transition over if you want so that you can make sure you catch the rest of the show because it gets good at the end of the night. A lot of information I'm not allowed to share here. I do share there. It's good stuff. You should watch it. So let's talk about Gina Carano, right? I'm not saying her name right, I'm sure. So this is the New York Post article because I wanted to see, I heard that she had been fired and I wanted to know, well, what did she say? How bad was it? Let's find out. So Gina Carano, if you didn't watch The Mandalorian, I recommend, I don't know, maybe at this point, maybe don't, all right? But it was a good show before they went down this road. Says actress Gina Carano has long embraced the force of speaking her mind, an act that got her booted from Star Wars spinoff The Mandalorian. The former MMA fighter was confirmed on Tuesday to have been kicked off the hit Disney show where she played Cara Dune, with Lucasfilm stressing, quote, there are no plans for her to ever return. The Star Wars giant made no secret of why she was canceled, ripping her social media posts, denigrating people based on their cultural and religious identities, which it called abhorrent and unacceptable. Carano's most controversial message, and one that appears to have been the final straw, came when she shared an image from Nazi Germany and compared it to today's overheated political climate. How dare she compare Democrats to Nazis? It says right here, this is the post. Let's blow it up for you to really see it. Jews were beaten in the streets, not by Nazi soldiers, but by their neighbors, even by children. It says, quote, because history is edited, most people today don't realize that to get to the point where Nazi soldiers could easily round up thousands of Jews, the government first made their own neighbors hate them simply for being Jews. How is that any different from hating someone for their political views? And she shared this. And so they fired her. And she also, by the way, they said that there were some other things that she had done. She had done some controversial tweets when it came to the pandemic. She also jumped on another conspiracy theory, they said, over the suicide of pedophile Jeffrey Epstein, posting Wednesday a square full of letters containing the message, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. How dare she believe these things? Oh, my God, what a wackadoo. What a wackadoo, right? That's what they're thinking. So they said, we can't have this conspiracy theorist actually working on our show, even though everything she said was true. So she has been silenced for saying things that, first of all, were true, historically accurate. Now, Jeffrey Epstein, we don't know, but many of us suspect that Jeffrey Epstein did not kill himself. It's not so much a conspiracy theory. It's almost a conspiracy to believe he did, right? So many of us agree with her on that. As far as, her controversial posts when it comes to the pandemic, many people also agreed with her on that. The science is not settled on it, even though some people will think that it is. And secondly, lastly, her post about Germany and Nazi Germany, it is a disservice in our historical learnings for people to believe that this happened in a vacuum and overnight. Nazi Germany did not happen in a vacuum and overnight. In fact, it took 20 years before Hitler finally got it to the point. He got the people greased to the point where they were able to agree with everything he said. And they said, all right, let's do it. Let's do the most abhorrent thing imaginable. It took 20 years, guys. This was not something that happened overnight. And it wasn't something that he did alone. And she's right. It did take people getting to the point where they hated their neighbors. They hated their fellow Germans. Remember, and we hear this, when you study this history, they say these Jews were not Jews, they were Germans. And many of them said they were Germans. And my family comes from, I should say, half of my family is from Vietnam. The other half is from the great country of Denmark. And the Danish, there's a wonderful story. I'll try to tell you this story without tearing up before we move on with this. But when the Danes were trying to be neutral during the war for most of the time, but there was a concerted effort in the population to resist, and they were peacefully sort of resisting. They would do little things like when an SS officer would chase after somebody, suddenly a bunch of Danes would kind of swarm the SS officer so that they couldn't get through the crowds. You know, there was this act of resistance that was going on in the Danish people. And at the time, Denmark was run by King Christian, obviously not Jewish, right? And at one point, you know, the Germans kind of got fed up with Denmark and said, all right, if you don't turn us, you know, make all your Jews wear stars, then we are going to take over. You're not going to be considered so neutral anymore. We'll consider you hostile. And the Jewish people in Denmark said, we don't want this to happen to our great country. We don't want this to happen. So we are going to let us wear this. We're going to go ahead and wear the star. Sorry, I'm going to tear up because this is such a great story. It's true. It's in the books. It's a hard story to find. It's very buried in there deep, but it's a good story. So the king said, absolutely not. You will not wear the star. You're Danes. You're not Jews. You're Danes. You know, you're Jews, but you're Danes. So no, we're not going to separate you out and have you do this. And the Danish people said, please, you know, we really don't want our country to be invaded and taken over. And so the Germans said, turn in your list, turn in the list of all the Jews in your country, and that we demand this. And so the mayor and the king said, fine. And they turned in the list. And the list contained two names, the mayor and the king. Sorry, such a good story. It's a true story, guys. So, and I cry every time I tell it. I've been telling this story for years, and I cry every time I tell it because it's such a good story. So you have to forgive me, but it's a good one. So, then the Germans got really mad, and they said, that's it. We're going to, you really have to all wear the star. And so all the Jews the next day wore the star, and the king rides out on his horse with the star on. Such a good story. King Christian, he wore the star. Okay. So there was a lot of this resistance going on, but you have to remember that during that time, what was going on was, the turning of the people against this other group was not something that happened overnight. And it wasn't something that just happened in a vacuum. And it wasn't something that, it took a long time to program the people to believe that their enemy were their fellow Germans. Denmark never bought into that. They said, you're fellow Danes. We're not doing this. But the German people said, you're not really one of us. You're terrorists of some kind. You're terrorizing us, and we need to get rid of you, right? So, historically, what Gina posted was actually accurate, historically true. But it's abhorrent, they think, to compare the censorship that is going on and the taking down of content and right now, and it's not just about the censorship, it's about the, calling all of these Trump supporters in America, painting all of them as domestic terrorists who believe in QAnon, to believe that they're all insurrectionists, that anybody who supported Donald Trump is just this terrible person, that they're not really one of us, that they are terrorists that need to be taken down. It's not a stretch to see how that's actually a parallel. Now, does that mean we're going to get to a point where the worst thing happens? I sure as hell hope not. I hope we never get to that. I hope we never see that sort of activity ever again. But we have to remember that it's in all of us all the time. And people always think they're better than others. People have this false notion inside of themselves that they are better than. When they read the history books and they hear about these white male slave owners, they think, I'm better than them. I would have never done that. That generation was abhorrent and terrible, and we should curse them all because they were evil human beings. People seem to think that they themselves could have never fallen into that. When they see what happened in Germany, they say, oh, these terrible people. You know, how did they, nobody ever stops to say, I could have been one of those terrible people potentially. And so what do I need to do to protect myself from falling into that mental trap? How did it happen? How did a person like me become one of these people to agree with doing these bad things? Nobody ever stops anymore these days to ask those questions. What they do now is they say, well, I could never be that bad. I could never be that bad. And that is a real problem that we're facing, because people can march down these really dark roads without realizing it. And they think they're above that type of abhorrent behavior. And meanwhile, we are seeing day after day after day, it seems like this increase in this behavior that is so scary for many of us. It is frightening. It is absolutely frightening. So, she was fired for this, by the way. And then people say, well, and I've seen some people say, well, she was given a second chance and she blew it. Actually, the second chance, this tweet that came out, if I am correct, this was out in November. I think she said this stuff in November is when this tweet came out. Maybe not. I thought it was. And so either way, whatever, it wasn't that. To me, that's not a controversial tweet. I wanted to show you this. I did a Google search. I want to show you the Google search. Because if what Gina Carano did was so terrible, let's talk about all the many times that Trump was compared to Hitler by Democrats. Talk about the pot calling the kettle black. I did a search here. I put Trump Hitler in the search field, and I did a targeted search from January of 2017 to December of 2018. So for 2 years, the first 2 years of Trump's presidency. And I wanted to just see what popped up during those years when you type in Trump Hitler, which it's a cool tool in Google search if you didn't know you could do that. And here we go. Theconversation.com, Trump Hitler comparisons, too easy and ignore the murderous history. Okay. So that person recognizes that people are doing it. Michael Moore compares Trump to Hitler in new documentary. Look at that. Michael Moore. But did his agents drop him? Did his movie house drop him or producers drop him? Probably not, right? We know they didn't. Washington Post. It's not wrong to compare Trump's America to the Holocaust. Oh, shit. Okay. The Hill. The strategic blunder of the Trump is Hitler. Okay. Donald Trump, The Independent from the UK. Donald Trump kept book of Adolf Hitler's speeches. This one, Beacon, comparing Trump to Hitler, not so fast. Like, people are having a debate about it, right, at that time. So people were clearly comparing him to Hitler. Other people were saying, I don't know about that. And it was a debate. Nobody said, stop, cancel you, and fire you for doing this. Here's this one, Times Free Press, that says, stop comparing Trump to Hitler. This one right here, this is usnews.com. Trump propaganda, the destruction of the free press. And it says he and his advisors fomented Lügenpresse, the concept of lying press made famous by the Nazi Party in Germany during Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Here's this other one, The Guardian. Trump borrows from old tricks of fascism. The Nazis claimed a monopoly on victimhood. So it's okay. Here's these videos. Michael Moore compares Donald Trump to Hitler. There's the video there. Yale professor, why it's useful to compare Trump to Hitler. And, Tina Brown on Trump's appeal in that Hitler book. That's from CNN. So there you go, right? They were doing this all the time and nobody lost their job. People weren't, it was actually trendy and the right thing to do to say that Trump was Hitler and that these Republicans were Nazis and that we were seeing a resurgence of the Nazi Party in America. That was the thing to do. That was okay. In fact, you were on the right side of the conversation if you were saying that. And if you weren't, then you were an abhorrent Trump supporter and you were just one of them. But suddenly, when you say that about Democrats and you say that they're now acting like authoritarian fascists and that they are now going around and implementing the tricks of the trade, the tricks of Hitler trade, suddenly it is wrong. You are out of line and you deserve to lose your job.